So the title of the panel is a new playbook, The Future of U.S. Competitiveness, as Anya just explained. This is mostly about competitiveness inside the United States. I would think of it two ways: competition on the battlefield and competition to create a thriving defense industrial base. And if there's going to be a new playbook to confront those challenges, it seems to me that we have to address some big ideas that we're going to tackle over the next few minutes. How do we achieve the pace and the agility of innovation that we've seen certainly on the battlefield in Ukraine, to a certain extent out of Israel, but we have not historically seen out of the United States? How do we create the adequate mass that Ukraine has reminded us we will need in any conflict? And how do we overcome the challenges to the workforce in the defense industrial base? That's a workforce problem. It's also, as COVID revealed, a real supply chain problem, and in that sense, what steps can we take, and what steps and what collaboration do we need across the world? And finally, as Chris has argued on this stage, we believe that there needs to be a teaming, if you will, that you cannot have the future of warfare be only autonomous or only undersea autonomous drones. It needs to be both that and things like subs and bombers. And that's going to get us to a big idea, which is, if there was a Last Supper in 1993 that created the consolidation of the primes, is there a first breakfast, if you will, a reset between government and industry? So let's start with pace and agility of innovation. And Mike Schnabel, let me start with you. C.Q. Brown, when he was still at the Air Force before he became chairman, his line was accelerate change or lose. Of course, it's conventional wisdom now that we're not moving fast enough. Why not? Why aren't we moving fast enough? And from your perspective, from Boeing's perspective, why not?
Thanks, and I'll just say thanks. It's an honor to be part of the forum, so really pleased to be here today. Yeah, great start and an easy softball, right, to get going, fix the entire acquisition system. I think part of it is really facing the need and facing the situation. There was a lot of discussion on some of the other panels about, are we on a war footing and those type of things. There's increasing sense that we need to be better and more prepared. And when you look at we're in the same acquisition system, as Chris pointed out, since the 60s. But, we put out some really great stuff through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. A lot of it we're still using. And I think the difference was that pressure of the Cold War. And so we're in a situation that seems very similar. So you're seeing things in the previous administration, and certainly in this administration, that are acknowledging the situation has changed, and we need to adjust for that. Whether that's new acquisition processes, whether that's increased study in the industrial base, increased money directly for industrial-based things that was just in the One Big Beautiful Bill. Acknowledging those is really the first step, but we're still in those first couple steps, and we need to move quicker, as Chris said yesterday.
Chris, George, go into some of the things that you and Intel are working on. So talk about research and development. Do we have the research and development that's needed? And how can policy shift so it's easier to acquire, to deploy leading-edge technologies?
All right. There's a lot in that. On the R&D side, so I'll speak mostly from the perspective of tech in the realm of AI, semiconductors, quantum, which is what Intel participates in. It's an interesting time where in some segments like AI, there's a ton of commercial demand, and industry is driving R&D forward at a pace that is frankly hard for industry itself to keep up with, and even harder, I think, for governments to keep up with as you look at, all right, what do you regulate, how do you regulate, and how do you kind of make sense of, because the innovation is just happening on a daily basis. In some of the other areas like semiconductor manufacturing, the capital intensity is extremely high, and we've seen that both our allies as well as our competitors geopolitically are investing. So Japan has a CHIPS Act, and they are spending quite a bit of money to get more competitive in the R&D space for semiconductors. Similarly, the EU is spending quite a bit, and absolutely China is spending lots and lots of money to get leading-edge manufacturing technology for semiconductors. So I think that it needs to be a mix of how do you harness the commercial innovation engines that exist, and then figure out how to tune it to what the government, the specific needs of the government. And so kind of a personal perspective or an Intel perspective on that, if you look at this program, Secure Enclave, that we've announced, that's leading edge process technology, that's not built exclusively for government use. It's built on the back of our commercial capability because it's just too expensive to build a leading edge fabrication facility. I think that's going to be true for a lot of R&D areas now in these really where huge investments are required just to figure out how to get better alignment with industry.
Chris Brose, I began by framing one of the challenges as agility and pace that the battlefield on Ukraine has reminded us of. From your perspective, from Anduril's perspective, what is the best way to go about that to make our system more agile?
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think we should first and foremost just acknowledge the reality, right? That when we're talking about national defense, it is a monopsony. It is only the government that buys weapons, at least I hope that's the case. So it is inherently on the government to determine how this market is going to function, right? You had the Last Supper because the government basically said after the Cold War, budgets are going down, there's not going to be enough money for all of you, we need an industrial consolidation. We got exactly what the government directed. I think Washington is a very process-centric city. And whenever we ask the question, are we changing enough? Are we changing fast enough? Are we doing enough? We always go back to some process that we think is wrong that's standing in our way. You know, we have to fix the acquisition system. We have to reform the budget system. There's lots of things that Congress needs to do differently or, not do. I actually think, and I could be wrong, that we actually have all the authorities that we need to do this. With the One Big Beautiful Bill being passed, I think we have an enormous amount of money. I think we have amazing human capital in and out of government. So I think what it really does come back to, which is, I think, kind of almost a scarier realization for people to hear, is there's no big boogeyman standing in front of us. It is entirely a function of leadership, how we change, and the pace with which we do that. And I think this is doubly important in the defense context where, look, I spent most of my career working in government bureaucracies. I'm not a hater of bureaucracies. We need bureaucracies to do things. I need the bureaucracy to pick my garbage up every Monday morning. I don't want it innovating in waste removal. I just want the trash to get picked up. So, I think when we look to, kind of the defense world, we need leadership to direct the bureaucracy to do new and different things. We can't expect new ideas and sort of disruptive approaches to necessarily always surface from the bottom up. And I think, again, that's doubly true in a Defense Department context where you have all of these different communities that set requirements for weapons, that program money for weapons, that acquire weapons, that use weapons. None of them work for one another, right? They all work for someone whose first name is secretary or chief. So it is doubly important on leadership to use the authorities they have, the money they have, to force the system to do new and different things. And, it's still very early in this new administration, but I think we're starting to see, some pretty encouraging signs of that.
What signs are you seeing already?
I mentioned it yesterday, but I think what Secretary Driscoll is doing in the Army is something that everybody should be paying attention to. Stuff that people have talked about for years, he's getting done in the first half of this year. Consolidation of acquisition systems, revising requirements, eliminating programs that probably never should have gotten started and redirecting money into new capabilities, forcing the process to serve soldiers rather than the other way around. A lot of that's happening, and I don't just mean to kind of lionize the Army. I think there's other good things happening elsewhere, but that's a particular example that I think people should pay attention to.
Hey, Nick, can I jump in there?
Sure.
Because continuing on with the bill, right, there's tax breaks for R&D, which matters for all of us, right? The workforce improvements, it's not just about individual programs either, the specific money for the industrial base, right? To look at places where there are weaknesses. I'm obviously expecting in the short term it will be, hey, what were the stress points that were identified in both the Middle East and Ukraine, and how do we fix some of those? But I'm hopeful that it goes beyond that, right? It goes beyond just Because frankly, a war in the Pacific is going to be quite a bit different than what's turned into much like trench warfare in Ukraine, right? And those will require different weapons, different agility. We need to be studying that. We need to be studying what industrial mobilization in this century looks like. So we're not running out of munitions. We don't have shortage of drones, et cetera, and we're well prepared to extend whatever fight that's there for our country to step up to.
And to do that, of course, we need a defense industrial base and a workforce that can actually be there to create this stuff. And so, Mike, let me stay with you for a second, but let me bring in shipbuilding. To me, is the obvious example here. So I once spoke to a leading shipbuilding executive who said, it's almost impossible for me to keep people, keep workers, young workers on or hire them because they tell me they can make the same at an Amazon facility and they don't feel the need to have the career that this particular shipbuilder was offering. So Mike Schnabel, address that. How do you grow the workforce and just explain how this one big beautiful bill, as it's called, might help?
Well, first of all, I'd say the defense industry, we get a little bit of extra benefit in talent just because, folks, there's a sense of service, I think, associated with it to a degree. So I think we get a little bit of plus on talent there. But, we're competing with tech industry and everyone else. It's going to be tough, right? And so you talked about the bill. It's going to help all Americans, but it doesn't necessarily make the defense industry more competitive against those other ones. Chris mentioned just the money coming into it, the increased programs. What I'm hopeful for is if we have increased stability across those programs, that helps dramatically with the workforce. Because some of the ups and downs, especially as the services assess their needs in a particular year, that doesn't necessarily play well for a long production system, which means your suppliers are like, do I want to get in this game if it's not going to be here 3 years from now? So I think the predictability in the defense system in general, if that increases, I think that's dramatically going to help that defense workforce, which is why am I going to put up with the ups and downs?
Why? Because you can simply offer more money? I mean, isn't that one of the fundamental problems?
I would say yes, but it's more about knowing the job that I currently have is still there 5 years from now. And I think that's a bigger issue. I'm living in maybe a town that I want to live in, but and living the life I want, but is there risk that this job is here 3 years from now based on a certain production system?
Can I add a point just on workforce? I agree with everything that he said, and maybe just add a different kind of point of emphasis. I think a lot of the workforce challenges are actually, kind of downstream of problems that we have created for ourselves and how we have defined our military systems, right? Over the past generation, we've made these systems ever more exquisite, ever more expensive, ever harder to produce. Where that shipbuilding example that you mentioned, well, if your ability to scale shipbuilding is gated on training master welders who take 10 years to become expert at their craft, like these become artisanal products, right? And you can't scale artisanal products but so much. So, as an historical example, if you go back to World War II, we were able to transform the Willow Run automotive production facility to build B-24s, which I think was a Boeing product, if memory serves, because the bomber at that time was not wildly different than the commercial cars and trucks that line was building, right? You could bring workforce in with minimal amounts of training, the Rosie the Riveters, and they could contribute to the kind of rapid scale up of a military system, largely off of a commercial base and commercial labor, because the systems weren't wildly different. There's no way that we could build a B-21 long-range strike bomber, on a Tesla facility or a Ford facility, because it has become so wildly different and divergent from the commercial product. So my point in all of this, and I think how we're thinking about the workforce problem at Anduril, is actually how do I design military systems from the outset where I can access the broadest potential pool of labor because the systems themselves are simple to build and simple to put together. Cruise missiles that take, 5 or 10 tools to put together. I mean, it becomes more akin to like Home Depot level, skills as opposed to, the kind of exquisite artisanal labor that we see required all across our traditional defense industrial base.
Chris, George, expand this discussion argument to supply chain resilience. What do you see that the U.S. can do itself, kind of what Chris Brose was just saying, and where does this making the supply chain more resilient, where does it need to expand overseas? How do we need to think about that beyond just bringing it into the U.S.?
Well, I think there's a couple different directions you could go there. From a workforce perspective, if I reframe it a little bit, how do I get a resilient supply chain of talent? I was actually out at Argonne National Lab yesterday for ribbon cutting for a big supercomputer we were opening there, and had the opportunity to speak with Secretary Wright from the Department of Energy. And we talked about this some. How do we get the best possible talent? If you ask what makes America such a competitive place in the first place, I would argue we have a surplus of brain power. Like, we have a lot of smart people here, and we attract a lot of really smart people here. And we need to continue to attract a lot of really smart people. So one of the first ways I would look at supply chain resilience, maybe from a slightly different angle, is how do I continue to make the U.S. the most attractive place to be for all the absolute smartest people in the world? So they come here, they establish family, they go to grad school, they establish families, they can become, completely integrated in the community, and they're sharing all their amazing ideas and making great products and technology. That's a piece of it. Maybe to the more conventional view of supply chain, there's an idea that we'd pushed heavily towards globalization over a number of decades, and we've been pulling back towards more regionalization. And some of those things are easier to do than others. So, for instance, getting rare earth minerals, that's pretty challenging. And we know that China has a very strong position, not just from procuring the minerals, but also in terms of refining them. And so investment has to be made to figure out, okay, how do we work with our allies, and how do we take advantage of our own resources in order to get stronger there. And then I think there are other places, like we saw with COVID, where there was just unexpected breakdowns in the supply chain. Again, from a chip perspective, I would not have predicted that a global pandemic would suddenly make it hard to buy an F-150. That was, surprising, because it's like, well, why did it happen? Well, they couldn't get, a legacy chip from a foundry that is in another part of the world where they're not going to build more capacity. And so I think that we need to do a deeper dive, particularly in the defense industrial base and national security sectors, of understanding what are all those dependencies that are somewhat unexpected, not just so that we're ready for accidental occurrences, but also for more targeted disruption.
Mike Schnabel, do you want to jump in here? And I know one of the points that you're looking at is how do we get the U.S. government to advocate for U.S. companies overseas as well?
Yeah, before maybe I go to that,
Sure.
Something to sort of in between what both these gentlemen said is, accessing commercial technologies, making things easier. One thing I'd also say is, even in exquisite systems, you can take advantage of that. Boeing invests heavily in full-size determinate assembly, right? Doing digital engineering, making it easier for the supplier to supply, it gives you more suppliers that can jump in. And that can be on the most exquisite system, but on certain parts can be relatively easy to integrate. So I think it's not just throw money at it, hope suppliers work. When we buy more, it'll just work itself out, or just a planning problem. It's also make it easier to increase your supply base by making more folks available to jump in for you. On getting advocacy, sort of stretching from that was mostly a domestic conversation to international. Partners and allies are a huge part of how the U.S. government fights wars, and most importantly deters. We talked a lot about that, I think, the other night, about we don't do anything alone. Part of that is being able to work well and be prepared to fight with our friends and allies. A lot of times common equipment helps with that. And the U.S. government has been great in advocating. There's a whole system through the Commerce Department where you can get advocacy, where generally they will root for you, if you will, as you're competing against foreign competitors. And that in many situations can be against adversaries, where perhaps a particular defense buy might lean them one way or the other. And that's sort of basic Cold War tactics, right? But that's happening today. And then in other cases, it may just be against an ally, but it's something that goes into the industrial base. So I'm very encouraged. This administration's been extremely helpful through very active through most of this year in trying to accelerate those discussions so we are able to integrate and deter with our friends and allies.
Chris Brose, I wonder if that's how you see it. Has Anduril received U.S. government advocacy overseas, and how do you confront that challenge?
If I think hard about it, possibly I'll come up with an instance by the end of the day where we've had good U.S. government advocacy for some of the things we're doing.
Does that mean the answer is no?
It means the answer is give me till the end of the day and I'll probably come up with an example. But look, I mean, we're a new company, right? I mean, government advocates for programs of record, which are things that the U.S. government has determined through its own processes it's going to buy for itself. And then it's going to go advocate to, you know, ally X or Y, hey, you should really buy this too. So in order to, you know, get that kind of advocacy, you often have to go through the U.S. process to win those programs of record, and I would say we're getting there. I think the argument I'd make is a little bit different, right? Which is I think our perception, and I don't necessarily think people up here would disagree with this, but we can discuss it, is that the international environment has also changed, right? I do not see our allies and partners wanting, in sort of the traditional way, to just be buyers of American technology. They want to be builders, they want to be contributors, and that's something that you have to kind of meet them where they're at. So for us, a lot of the work and success that we found is actually going directly with that foreign ally and saying, look, we will set up, in the case of Australia, we've set up an entire company to design, develop, and now start to move into mass production of an extra large autonomous undersea vehicle. It's basically a robotic submarine the size of a school bus that can go thousands of miles, carry lots of cash and prizes to do fun defense things. But that is a program that we did organically with the Australian Navy. That was not something that the US government advocated for. Frankly, the reason we're doing it with Australia was we didn't see a pathway to doing it with the United States. So, you know, I think that is, the Navy's complicated, but you know, we're getting there. You know, I think it's more just to say, this is an opportunity, right? Our allies have an opportunity to do things that the US government, for whatever its reasons, can't do, won't do, aren't able to do right now. And they can create a sense of disruption as well that gives the US opportunities to go, frankly, buy more of what those allies are contributing to us, rather than it always necessarily going the other way around. So I actually think this is a welcome environmental change. I think it's a reality that we have to deal with. I also think there's amazing opportunity for US companies if we play it the right way.
The great thing about Aspen, the great thing about these panels are we have companies like Boeing, like Anduril, and Intel actually is kind of in the middle. In fact, I mean, obviously it's you know, it's established legacy, but actually started much more similarly to Anduril than Boeing. And this is where I want to go to the first breakfast idea. So just a reminder, historically, July 21st, 1993, Les Aspin and Bill Perry have a big dinner. And it's known as the Last Supper because over the next few years, the consolidation in the defense industrial base goes from perhaps as many as 50 to 5 or so. And today, there is talk of a first breakfast, which means to me just like a reset of the relationship between government and industry. So Mike Schnabel, let me start with you. Is that a good way to think about collaboration moving forward and some of the challenges that we're confronting today? And if it is a good way, has it happened and why not?
Yeah, I love that analogy. So especially since, if anybody's been in the defense industrial base realm, Last Supper somehow works its way in at some point. So I love having a new term to slide in there. I think it's starting to happen, right? I think there's a real opportunity, you know, whether it's Boeing or Anduril, right? Like, we want to win. Like, we want our country to win. We want our allies to win. We want our companies to do well. And I think there's a realization, you know, I'm allowed to talk to him, right? Like, we understand that cooperating, we each have strengths, whether it's a prime supplier or two primes teaming together. Those opportunities are continuing to rise because frankly, the government is setting that stage to be able to do that. So I think we're, you know, if we're not at first supper, maybe we're having mimosas beforehand, right? Like we're getting,
first breakfast, so we're drinking in the morning.
First breakfast. Sorry,
yeah.
I'm already lost. I think it's starting to happen, but we have to continue to accelerate.
Can I just very briefly underscore that point, right? The Last Supper was about subtraction. And I don't know whether it's first breakfast or, we're at brunch or probably not even there yet, but it has to be about addition, right? This isn't about, taking money out of, his pocket to give it to ours or vice versa. We just need more, right? I think that is the lesson that all of these years of paying attention to Ukraine and the Middle East and war games, we don't have enough weapons, we don't have enough capacity, we're not building enough. I think there's now agreement on that, which is very exciting. So, it's going to be companies that have a long legacy of producing and delivering that are going to have to be part of that. It's new companies that, are still working our way into that position that are going to have to be part of that. Those companies are going to team together as Anduril and Boeing are teamed together on an opportunity. We're building rocket motors to supply to them for small diameter bombs to provide to Sweden. Like, this is fantastic. This is how it should work. I think the main point that I would emphasize is that just as the government effectively created the incentives for the Last Supper, it has to create the incentives for something new and different. And I mean that at scale, right? I mean in the mobilization in World War II level mentality, which we have to have in this regard. Which is how you start to create that new productive capacity, how you bring new entrants in, how you enable the traditional defense companies to continue to change and do great things for the country, all of that to work together. That has to be led by the government with incentives that make that possible.
Chris, George, do you see the government doing that? Creating these incentives, creating this environment that in which if the conventional wisdom, if the baseline for this conversation is we're not moving fast enough, we're not agile enough, and we need something that gives us the ability to do that, do you see evidence that that's happening?
I think that people are saying that they want to do that. So a lot of the language is right. So maybe my world is pretty different than the Anduril and the Boeing worlds. In that Intel is not a defense company. But we had one of our intelligence agency partners come up to us and say, Intel, you're not a DIB, but you're not a DIB, so you kind of got to figure it out, which is true, right? We're not a defense company. At the same time, we are working more and more in that space, and because of the role that semiconductors play, because of how conflict is changing in the world and the role technology plays in general, there is a need for companies like Intel to become more involved, to have a better understanding of what the government needs. All that said, the way that a company like Intel, and I would argue a lot of technology companies operate, is you figure out how to make one thing and sell it a bazillion times, right? For Intel, that's great. If I could make one chip and it worked for everything, everywhere, all the time, that's what I would do. And I would sell it all over the place, and it would be super, super profitable. The government's on the other end of that spectrum. They're like, I want like 10 chips. And you're like, well, that's going to be really expensive. So it turns out making a chip and designing a chip is really pricey at the leading edge. So the government says, well, I want to set policies in place in order to get new folks coming into the industry. I want to make it easier. I want to change procurement requirements. And we're like, great, we're ready to do that. And then typically things end up stalling, not at the highest level, but then as you get working through contracting officers and the specific procurement rules, it just kind of stalls out. And you really have to find some pretty creative teams on the government side, and there are many out there, to help push through those. So I'm starting to see it from our perspective. We are getting some traction, but more momentum to build.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm running out of time here. Going to open it up for questions just very briefly. Chris Brose, if you could just quickly acknowledge part of this conversation, as I started, about competitiveness is winning the war. And if we're going to talk about how the Pacific is different, do you think that we're ready to fight in the Pacific? I think we know the answer to what you're going to say there. But to the conversations that we've been having about the challenges, is there something specific about the Pacific fight that we need to understand in order to understand, that's what we need to focus on when it comes to being more competitive?
Yeah, and let me be crystal clear on this. Are we ready to fight today? Absolutely, I believe we are. Are we ready to fight if that war lasts a month or 6 months or 2 years? Then I think it becomes more debatable, right? Because I think for 30 years or so, really ever since that Last Supper, we've been building our military under a set of assumptions that I don't think hold true anymore. Our wars are going to be short, we're not going to shoot a lot of weapons, we're not going to lose a lot of things. So if that turns out not to be true in the Pacific, I don't think we're going to be able to regenerate a lot of the things that we're expending or losing. So I think the real impetus for the kind of change we need is complementing this amazing legacy military that we have and the exquisite capabilities that it's going to bring to the fight on day one, with additional capabilities that are more sustainable, et cetera, those are going to have to look very different than the kinds of things that I think people are paying attention to in Israel or Ukraine, where the realities of that battlefield are just very different, right? It's shorter range, it's more tactical. It's not just a question of like, we're going to take FPV drones from Ukraine and just like drag and drop them into the Indo-Pacific Command for Admiral Paparo. The geographies are expansive. The threat is far more sophisticated and challenging. The environment that we're going to have to operate in is far more stressing and taxing. The industrial capacity that China brings to that fight, is frankly an order of magnitude more than what the United States has, which is also the problem. So how we sustain that becomes relevant. So, are we ready immediately? Absolutely. But I think the challenge for all of us is realizing that historically America's wars have lasted a long time. And unfortunately, the wars that we're now paying attention to across the Middle East and Ukraine, I think, are a harbinger of the fact that wars of the future are not going to be over in a week.
Bridge Colby would argue we need to have more prioritization, that if in the Cold War we had a concept of operations where we could say, the Soviet Union is going to go through the Fulda Gap, so therefore this is what we need to do in response to that. Do we need a more tight notion of concept of operations that essentially is a prioritization?
Yeah, and Bridge has been a personal friend for 20 years, and I said nice things about his book, and what I've written in my own is absolutely we need prioritization. Like, as we've been saying for years, China needs to be the pacing challenge that focuses our defense planning. However, that does not mean that we can just afford to walk away from all of our other global commitments and sort of let the Middle East sort itself out. We've run that social science experiment before. It's ended real badly. Walking away from Europe right now, I don't think is a good idea. But my point is not that we're going to do those types of missions with the traditional systems that we've always used. I think that the very exciting opportunity is those now become opportunities for innovation. Those missions remain important, counterterrorism remains important, homeland security remains important. How are we going to do it differently with new technology so that we don't bankrupt the country, so that we don't, kind of outstrip our ability to produce the things that we're still struggling to produce? It's an opportunity to innovate and change, not to say, we're just going to walk away from very important missions that I think are going to have a negative, unfortunate repercussion for the United States.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Let's open it up to questions. Let's start in the back over there, the table. Thank you. And please direct your question and keep it brief, please. Thank you.
My name is Reinhard Büdikofer. Listening to what the gentlemen are saying on stage, I learned that there's a huge need to ramp up industrial base in order to service the needs of the American military. Then from a European point of view, I ask, as we are trying to expand our military expenditure, how much can we rely on your capabilities to service our market too? Or should we rather opt for the French way?
Mike, you want to take that on?
Yeah, I'll say let's not opt with the French way. It's going to be a team. We were talking a little bit earlier about how international cooperations on arms happens. Nothing's transactional anymore. There's not, I want a fighter, I want a helicopter. Okay, we built it and there it is. Everything now is cooperation. There's an expectation that there's a win-win besides just what the capability inherent in that system is. And that means we've got to work together. So whether that is sometimes redundant capabilities because we're worried about future industrial capacity if a war kicks up, we need to have those discussions with each other. It might be we're building maybe an exquisite European system on say a U.S. aircraft or vice versa. We're going to have to continue to work together because we're going to have the same adversarial situations. It's got to be a cooperative environment.
Great. Got a bunch of hands right in the middle, so let's try and go through. So let's go from your left to that way. So right here, right in front of you. Yeah, right there. Perfect. Great. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. When it comes to increasing...
Just identify yourself, sir.
Hi, I'm Bintu Musahari. I'm a Foreign Service Officer at the State Department and a Rising Leader 2025. When it comes to increasing competitive advantage in 2025 and beyond, I'm curious to hear what role you all see soft power and diplomacy playing, if any, to benefit American companies and increase our overall competitive advantage.
Chris George, you want to take that, or Chris Brose?
I can start from, I guess, as Chris Brose will be more eloquent. So I think it's incredibly important. Again, I'll look at things more from the tech perspective, and so even when it comes to discussions around things like having discussions around things like export controls, building relationships internationally, being able to have the level of investment required to build technology. So a specific example, I think that the U.S. and Japan should do a lot more together in like high performance computing. Japan has amazing supercomputing expertise, and to the earlier question, I'm still chewing on that, the Europe question, because it's something that I've thought a lot about as well, and I think there's that question about diplomacy that ties in there. It's, can our allies count on us to be good partners? And what I've heard recently is no. And that's concerning to me as an American, and concerning to me, being at Intel, a largely American company. So having said that, I think that actually industry has a role to play, and we have been trying to play it, of figuring out how do we get the right products and technologies to be more widespread, so you don't have regionalization of technology as well, and policy is an incredibly important part of that. What you don't want to have happen is that you've got, all right, I've got the China, speaking of technology, a China tech stack, a Europe tech stack, a US tech stack, a rest of world tech stack. That is not how things will move quickly. And if you don't have a strong policy undercurrent that's helping to drive that, then you're going to have a real challenge.
Really interesting points. All right, a series of questions. Just go across the row. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Brigitte Thijs, I'm the ambassador of the Netherlands. As you know, the NATO summit was just held in The Hague, and there was also a NATO Industry Day. I don't know whether you were present, but there was a 9-point action plan that came out of it, and I'm curious to hear what do you think was good about it. It ranges from action plans to joint procurement, to joint test sites, innovation, etc. What do you like about it, and what did you miss in it?
Chris Brose, even if not that text, but yeah, the overall ideas.
I am not going to respond to sort of every element of the points and plans, right? Because I think we've seen a lot of plans that have come out of NATO, some of which are implemented, many of which are not. I would say the exact same thing about US plans and strategies, right? It's all nice to have it written down. The real question is there follow through? I guess the broader point that I would make, what I do see changing and what I am encouraged about is a realization that seems to be emerging in Europe that we are going to do more, right? We are going to spend more, we are going to invest more, we are going to build more, we're going to buy more. We can argue, like, why is that happening? Is it sustainable, et cetera, but it feels more real than previous times that I've sort of heard those words. I think if that is actually acted upon, and Europe really does follow through, and it'll be different in different national markets and environments, of course, but if that response is actually forthcoming over the years, if there's increased spending, increased buying, and Europe really levels up in terms of its commitment or recommitment to hard power, I think that will be worth its weight in gold. It'll be an enormous contribution to, kind of U.S. transatlantic, alliance and capability.
And to the points earlier, do you see any impact on domestic politics, reliability of the United States from the European perspective, these European doubts about U.S. reliability?
Look, I've been in this game for a while, not long as some people. It comes and goes, right? There are times where there's doubts about America's credibility and commitment, and then there's concerns that America's trying to do too much, et cetera. Like, with all seasons, right? I think the more important point is we in industry, I think, just have to meet our partners where they're at. One partner is going to want to buy things directly from Anduril, and we're happy to sell them. Another partner is not going to want to do that, but is going to want to welcome a teaming arrangement that we have, with one of their national champions or national companies, and we'll work that way. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer. I think that it will change as a function of time, but as of right now, I think there remain phenomenal opportunities for U.S. companies, Anduril included, to be successful in Europe. We're seeing that now. They may just look different than we thought they would, 6 or 12 months ago, or 6 or 12 months into the future.
All right, so we got, I think, one more, okay, two more, so we'll try and get, three. All right, we'll certainly try and get these two. Yeah.
Some of you, and I think it was you.
Sorry, introduce yourself quickly.
My name is Scheffler, Georg Scheffler. One of you said we need more, but when you do a quick AI or Google search, whatever you want to do, the military budget for the US is about 3 times as much as the next closest competitor, which no surprise is China. So if we need more, given the multiple here, what are we missing? Are we spending too much money on the wrong stuff? Or what is it when you say we need more?
Mike, you want to take that? And then
Yeah,
quickly,
sure.
and then we'll try and get to one last rising leader here.
I think it's fair to say we need more of some things, not everything, right? So it's making those smart decisions. When we've had, a period of time where the U.S. military was fighting, counterinsurgencies, there's a lot of focus on a particular part of weapons. Well, guess what? Other weapons, other systems were used as bill payers, right? R&D, thinking about the next war, all those things were still happening, but you're slicing a little bit off the edge every time. And frankly, that's built up in some of the weapons you would need in the high-end fight, right? So when we say more, it's more of a shift in what you're focusing on, in addition to trying to get to those next levels of technology. I hope that helps.
And let's fit in one last question, another rising leader. Thanks.
Hi, Reed Kessler from the House Armed Services Committee, and I'm a rising leader. Back to your original statement, Chris, about sort of how we're reforming and changing the bureaucracy and the downstream effects that'll have on the public-private defense ecosystem. Something that especially Secretary Driscoll's talked about is right to repair, and that's something that just came out of our markup a couple days ago as an amendment. I'm curious kind of your thoughts as we talk about what that actually means for the private-public partnership and handing over IP for right to repair, how private industry feels about that. Thanks.
You should probably jump in here because I feel like, for us, it's a little bit of a different angle, right? I think the ability for the government to repair capabilities that it's buying, it almost assumes that they're going to have them in inventory, right, for decades, and they're going to need to conduct those repairs. I think a lot of the focus for us is on building systems that are almost effectively like consumable items, right? You're going to have them for a few years. You're going to then buy the next best version. They're autonomous systems or low-cost weapons you're going to expend. I think that we are fully supportive of the government being able to field service those, maintain those. The Air Force's Collaborative Combat Aircraft program that we were selected on, a lot of the emphasis of that program was the logistical elements of it. Can it be maintained in the field in very kind of Spartan conditions? Is it easy to access? Do technicians understand how to do the basic work that they're going to have to do in environments where, like Anduril factories and employees are not always going to be available. So in that respect, very supportive of this idea and spirit. I think it's maybe a little bit of a different emphasis for us as a company, though.
Mike, you want to jump in just quickly, though?
Yeah, just say, as a phrase, right, that makes total sense. I think as that mindset continues to go forward, you need to start programs with that in mind. And I think when that happens, it adjusts who's investing where, and in a competitive environment, companies can make smart decisions. But as a concept, absolutely.
Chris Brose, Mike Schnabel, Chris George, thank you all very much.